Welcome everybody to the Cardboard Crash Course. My name's Ethan, and today we're doing a little bit more of a discussion than normal, and a little bit more off the cuff, though I do have the top 5 favorite things in my head that I want out of an expansion for Twilight Imperium. Now, we kind of know that an expansion is coming, and it's most likely going to be by the end of the year. It's not necessarily guaranteed it's going to be as large as Prophecy of Kings, and I kind of doubt it will be, but what we know is that it's box-shaped and heading right for us, which makes me believe it's probably a smaller than POK expansion. We know this from 2024's Gen Con announcement, where they talked about what's upcoming for Twilight Imperium and what we can expect for the next year or two. What that means to me is probably they, and by they I mean FFG, is going to announce the next TI4 expansion and have it ready for early copies at Gen Con this year, 2025. Let me know if you're going to try to make it to Gen Con and maybe we can meet up, because I believe I'm going to try to make it to at least a couple days myself. Anyway, I want to say that TI4 and POK together creates my favorite game, and I'm hoping if you are watching this video, you at least like it to a certain degree. And we can all agree that it's already great. There are a few things that need to be improved upon, and I could probably see a few things being added. So I've collected my thoughts and come up with a top 5 wish list for a new TI4 expansion. Before getting into the list, I want to give a couple honorary mentions, and I think most of you will agree with the first one, and that's new factions. New factions would be great, of course. It would definitely sell the expansion. It would create a lot of hype. The only thing that's a little difficult is that you'd have to include agents, heroes, mechs, all the extra peripherals that come along with new factions, and those aren't needed if you're only playing with the base game, so it would make the expansion a little difficult to purchase if you didn't already have POK. The only way that they could get around this is either just leaving those peripherals in the box and just playing with the base factions, which might limit a little bit of the faction diversity, or they could just say that it requires the POK expansion alongside the base game. Whichever way they decide to go about it, new factions would be exciting, plain as day. Alongside new factions would be more just general stuff. And that means, to me, new action cards, new agendas, new public objectives, more general supply things that could just variety up the game a little bit and make it a little more interesting every time you play. Now, for those of you crazy TI players, yes, Async, I'm looking at you, I think that this would definitely allow for a little bit more variety in different games, and the new factions themselves would provide some sort of boost. The reason why I'm not super excited for new factions is because if you just add a single thing to each already existing faction, it would create so many more years of gameplay to figure out exactly how they work. There are already 25. That is a pretty big amount. That's like as many characters as were in Smash Bros. Melee. 25 is crazy for this level of game, and the different interactions and different things you can find are already at an insane level. The Discordant Stars community has already done a fantastic job adding new factions, and Uncharted Space is already a great way to print and play some new planet tiles. So it would just be nice. Moving into my top 5, my 5th most wished for thing in a Twilight Imperium 4th Edition expansion would be more legendary planets. You can have legendary planets without having to purchase Prophecy of Kings because you just include the rules in there with them. We only have 4 legendary planets at the very moment. Right now we have Hope's End, which is hazardous, and then we have Primor, Malice, and Mirage, which are all cultural, and no industrial planets that are legendary. I figure if you're making some sort of massive legendary factory or something, that seems like an industrial legendary planet to me. And there's only 4 of them, which one of them comes from the Wormhole Nexus and one of them may or may not show up in your game. That's pretty crazy to me. There's gotta be more story and more lore to tap into with the legendary planets. As far as that goes, I'd also love new legendary planet cards, and better ones at that. All a legendary planet is now is just a single tiny little bonus each round. And yes, they can make a difference in very specific situations, but do you really care about a couple of fighters or a mech or an action card? I mean, it's possible depending on what objectives come out, but that's just not legendary planet to me. Why not have some kind of crazy industrial legendary planet that lets you produce more and more ships out of turn and doesn't have to activate its system in order to produce? It could be like a big space dock factory. That's just an idea I came up off the top of my head, and that makes sense in Twilight Imperium lore. I think new legendary planets, and especially ones that are mixed with an anomaly, would be a great way to expand the game. You could have one or two like Mirage that are just secretive. You could have a new secondary wormhole nexus. You could have all kinds of ideas, but legendary planets are just something that needs to be tapped into more. My number 4, and this is going to be a crazy one, is a third faction technology for each faction. Now that's going to seem like a crazy thing, but I think if you created a new technology for each faction and had it intertwine with its weaknesses to shore up some of its weaknesses, boost up some of its strengths, it would create an insane variety for the 25 factions we already know and love without having to add new factions to the game. Of course, it would have to be balanced like crazy around the necrovirus, but adding a new faction tech would be a lot of fun. I think some factions that came out of Prophecy of Kings still need to be a little bit tweaked, and especially those new ones that were all new to POK definitely need to be caught up with a little bit, because the flexibility power creep was just a little bit too much in my opinion. Adding a new faction technology to each faction doesn't add any sort of complexity to the game. It just adds a new tool, something that could intertwine with some bad faction technologies that are never used and boost each other up a little bit. Another reason why I want to focus on faction technologies is because the leader suite, agents, commanders, and heroes, took a little bit away from the faction technologies in terms of power level. It tore a little bit of the faction identity off to the command board, and I just think it needs to be injected into those base mechanics like technology again. I also want some faction technologies that are good in the late game and don't have such bad diminishing returns. My third most wished for thing is the simplest on this list, and it's to print Codex content. Now, I got it professionally printed off a shop on Etsy, and I'll even link that in the description below because it's pretty good quality. Now, this game is probably not going to get another expansion or maybe any Codex content after this year. There's a good chance that we go 5 to 10 years until we get Twilight Imperium 5th Edition without getting another expansion. That's because most Twilight Imperium games have been base game, and then a few years later, expansion, and a few years later after that, another expansion, and then we close it out for a while until the next edition. If this follows that same path, that means we're not getting any more official content that's print and play, which this is a perfect opportunity to print officially all of your print and play content. The only way that I see this not happening is because most of the content is tiny little tweaks that only the top most professional players care about. But that's not entirely true because casual players care about balance too. I use the updated extra hero, and even the most casual player that's never played the game before has told me how crazy and great it is. Having a full Council Colaris sheet that actually fits alongside all the other faction sheets would just be the cherry on top of a great game. I always have to explain, why is that Council Colaris faction sheet laminated? Why is it in 4 pieces? I know I could probably somehow spend a lot of money to get it printed out, but I want to support FFG and Twilight Imperium. FFG has become a company that I love, and I love a lot of their products, but Twilight Imperium is being put on the back burner, and we need a way to tell them with our wallets that we still want to support the game. Now that sounds like it's just begging FFG to take my money, but simply just a lot of players like having officially printed stuff. I play different miniature war games even, and something like Star Wars Legion tells us to do print and play content, but people are still interested in having the actual physical cards, even in a game like that. Codicy content being printed in this expansion would be a great way to tie a bow on the 4th edition of the game, before we roll into 5th edition 10 years from now. Alright, here's my top 2, and these are the 2 I'm definitely the most excited for. Number 2 is the craziest shot in the dark ever. It's more strategy cards. 1 or 2 to be precise. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be a 9th strategy card. Now we actually have precedents for this. In the 3rd edition of the game, I believe it was the Shards of the Throne expansion, it added 3 variant strategy cards. This allowed you to mix up some of those overpowered or underpowered strategy cards that came in the base game. I think they should do the same thing here. Diplomacy is underpowered, and they did a new edition of Diplomacy in the Prophecy of Kings expansion, but in my games it still doesn't get picked until like round 4 or 5 anyway. There are specific situations where it's powerful, yes, but I just think that Diplomacy and a couple others need to be tweaked. I also noticed that there's a different strategy card that relates to each mechanic in the game except for 2. There is no strategy card that relates to any of the leader suite, and no strategy card that relates to exploration. Imagine if we had an exploration/agent strategy card that either allowed you to re-explore planets or refresh your agent. Now, obviously, this would need to be powered up a little bit than just that, but I think that that's the only part of the game that isn't inherently affected by the strategy cards. Strategy cards should be the heart of the game, and each one of those cards should teach new players the different mechanics that happen throughout the game. Exploration and the agents are the only thing that it doesn't touch, and I definitely think we could use one for them. I also think in 8-player games, and 4-player games for that matter, it makes it a little less interesting that each strategy card is always guaranteed to be picked. There's a really interesting strategy card, which I'll put the creation and its creator on the screen now. It's a 9th strategy card that has to do with information. This would be a great way to actually trigger the Imperium Rex victory condition that never ever triggers throughout the game. That's when you run out of objectives. You could speed up the game using a strategy card that doesn't exist yet, and I think just having a couple new fun cards either slotted into the main thing or at the end of the strategy card row would just provide a ton of variety and definitely make those games a lot more interesting. In the future, we're going to have a video on this channel talking about the different strategy card ideas that people have had and coming up with our own hypothetical new strategy cards for the game. That's if a new strategy card system doesn't get announced for this upcoming expansion. If you want to see that and other Twilight Imperium content, subscribe, and if you're new here, welcome. I also want to say a word from the sponsor of this video, which is the Cardboard Crash Course Patreon. Yep, that's right, I'm sponsoring it. I have 3 patrons right now: Big Al Cappuccino, Phoenix Fire, and Turtle Dude. You 3 have been great throughout the years, and I appreciate it. Having more and more on this channel is what I plan to do, and if you want to support that by monetarily boosting the Cardboard Crash Course, I'd really appreciate it. I don't have too many benefits, but there are some there, and I do shout you out in videos. So if you're able to, and you'd like to throw a few dollars in, I would absolutely love you for it. With that being said, here's number 1. The number 1 thing that I want out of a Twilight Imperium 4th Edition expansion in the future is to overhaul the agenda phase. 3rd edition had different strategy cards, and one of them was the political card. That's right, it was called political, not politics. I don't know why. The agenda phase, called the political phase back then, was only triggered when somebody used that political strategy card, instead of at the end of the round once somebody's taken Mechatol Rex, like it is now. I think that this system is a lot better because people are forced into agendas, and agendas should be a major selling point of the game. I know when I was first purchasing this game that one of the major selling points to me was that every so often an agenda phase would come up and we could vote on new laws that would change the game. However, that's not what happens. There's a lot of nothing in that agenda deck. A lot. There's a lot of cards that just most players abstain from the voting from. Most players don't care. A lot of them have against no effect. That sucks. When somebody finally takes the Custodian's token and new players are excited to see what laws come up and it ends up just being something like destroy a few infantry and get trade goods out of it, I roll my eyes. And I'm pretty sure all my experienced players do too. Here's a hot take. We need more agendas like checks and balances. I know, you hate checks and balances. That's the one where you pick other people's strategy cards instead of your own. Now, I understand the hate, but at least it changes the game. It's ambitious. It actually does the thing that was promised of the agenda phase. It votes in new laws. If you actually improved the agenda phase, the Council Colaris would have laws to turn off. I want laws that come in and change the very way we play the game. Maybe boost everybody's economy, strip it down to its bare minimum, but not just a one-time bonus where all of a sudden everybody's reset to 3 command counters. I'm talking about basic level things. How about things like each player gets 2 actions per turn instead of 1 inherently? How about one where every time you do the primary of a strategy card, you can also do the secondary? Things that truly change the game. Things that people are scared to abstain from. Also, stop doing the no effect thing, things that people were just going to let pass. I know that technically that's political and a lot of laws end up being where people just sit out and don't care, but that's not fun gameplay. That's real life politics, and real life politics suck. There is amazing homebrew out there for this. My players have played with the Absol agendas, and they're a lot more interesting, but I think we could even go further. I think we could make them crazy and game-changing and not swingy inherently. It would have to be balanced to not just give certain factions insane bonuses and leave others in the dust, but we can do things like this. There is room for improvement in the agenda phase, and I think people should be excited and scared to take the Custodians token. If we had agendas that were so game-changing like that, it might actually provide some sort of interest as to when you take the Custodians token. That would create some crazy gameplay. And those are my top 5 things I want out of a Twilight Imperium 4th Edition expansion. I really hope it comes out this year, and I really hope that it's as great as we want it to be. If it's Dane Beltrami behind the wheel, I have a good feeling it will be. If you have any interest on this next expansion, any specific things that you want out of it, or any concerns over the things that I want, go ahead and leave those in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching the Twilight Imperium channel. This has been the Cardboard Crash Course, and I've been Ethan. Pax Magnifica, Bellum Gloriosum.